Walking down streets of my neighborhood, I saw the efficiency of a nail cutter. I heard the sound of the scissors of the ingenious tailor, or listened to the ice cream seller gently pressing the horn which awoke my taste buds. These are some of my first memories of resilience. What we call informal is a base of African entrepreneurship. We benefited from the skills and trade, yet we accepted the informality as something that we had to grow beyond. There were women in my neighborhood who every day would walk each street and knock on every door to collect empty bottles. They had a supply chain management process going, where they could resell some of these empty bottles for juices and nuts. And I was fascinated by the ability to transform that empty bottle into an input for trade. Some of these bottles found their way to the roasted plantain sellers, or filled with bisap, or nyamakuji. Or some of these bottles migrated to Europe, Canada, and the United States of America. Our mothers and sisters did recycling long before it became trendy, yet we did not help them to move up the value chain. All across the streets of African cities, creative minds are focusing their expertise to contribute to the economy. But because my generation accepted the informal classification, we did not make their life easier. We sometimes raise the full force of the law to discourage them instead of encouraging them and creating pathways to get them to share their knowledge in our classroom. From Abidjan to Bissau, from Kisangani to Cairo, from Cape Town to Lomé, we have allowed informality to dilute women's creativity. In many ways, those in the informal represented failure. They could not go because they could not go to school. I was often reminded by my elders that I would become like them if I didn't go to school. I was born in the decade that preceded the turbulent education transition in Côte d'Ivoire. While these two events are not related, they bear the intergenerational challenge that we are yet to resolve. My learning journey, up until my first year at the University of Abidjan, was straight line, with no major bumps. I was 12 when students stormed the streets of Abidjan and our school, demanding for changes in the system. Though it seemed like a distant experience, I found myself at the receiving end of the issues that confronted them when I turned 18. As far back as I can remember, I was always expected to learn. It was never forced on me. I was nudged to understand that it was something that no one could ever take away from me. In simpler and clearer terms, my father told me that my education was my inheritance. But the situation in Abidjan started to compromise his promise to me. I appreciate now even more the importance of these teachers that I had at the University of Abidjan. Though I felt that I was delayed, I cherish those moments when these teachers were able to teach me under very difficult circumstances. In a way, they reminded me a lot of these resilient women in the streets of Abidjan. They had to be creative to provide the skills to the community. But that group of women was never made to be recognized. But if entrepreneurship was the end game, why did we wait for technology to tell us what we knew? Because we called it informal, and now they call it the gig economy. I did not pursue that desire to understand that women in the recycling business could teach me. Back then, the possibility to cross that imaginary line was absent. And there are signs in Niger that African Development University is trying to do that. Back then, we didn't argue with our parents. They knew best. And my mother was right. I had a story of resilience right there in front of me. My father left Abidjan to Brazzaville to start a new career at almost 50. I had not made the connection until one day he came home unexpectedly. His office had been relocated to Harare in Zimbabwe. The political transition in Brazzaville, Congo, made his work difficult. That shift opened a boulevard for me, but I was still dreaming of France, Canada, or the United States of America. The situation at the University of Abidjan was deteriorating, and it became clear that my family, no matter how resilient we wanted to be, their inheritance for me was being compromised. I had the opportunity to finish my last year at the University of Abidjan, but I knew deep down that its value on the market was limited because many before me were unemployed. While we were supposed to learn, we found ourselves running away from the police in a similar way that street vendors had to. They were as less equipped as we were to the force of the law. Unemployment is a silent trauma of a common experience of my generation. We can no longer be confined to a narrative of formal education and formal employment. What we called informal has new clothes with some technology attached to it, and it's called now entrepreneurship. For the data, women trading in the streets of Accra, Abidjan, Nairobi, Niamey, Cairo, Addis Ababa, it is informal, yet it is work. It does not fit the definition of what is accountable and taxable. But if we pause to observe, they trade with marketing, accounting, negotiation skills, at traffic lights and other corners. We ought to reimagine our education system to harness the skills. Women in our streets have entrepreneurship skills that can become case studies in our schools and universities. Developing that narrative values their creativity. Their creativity is their currency. My currency was not devalued because I left Abidjan to Harare, then Cape Town. Along the way, I became more resilient because I understood that my father's inheritance, for me, was really my African education. He sacrificed to ensure that I become an African citizen with the tools and knowledge so that my own children, his grandchildren, become entrepreneurs. My generation has to resolve the intergenerational challenge of ensuring that education strengthens the Africa we have by valuing those in the gig economy, commonly referred in Africa as the informal economy. Today, I recognize in a way that in my youth, I did not take full advantage of the informal market. And I never looked at the informal market as a place for entrepreneurship, as a way in which they decided, these women, to solve a problem in society, not only to make money. It reminds me that the Africa we have is a power of resilience. Thank you.